Welcome everyone to 50 Leaders Over 50. This was a discussion that started with Andrew, myself, and Helen over the course of the pandemic, and as to what life looks like in terms of not only just what's coming up next in our lives, becoming, leaders, being over 50 years old, but what's the most important things in our life during this time too. And to really have a place where the conversation would take place with like-minded individuals as a source of inspiration and connectivity. As some of you just witnessed, some of the connectivity runs deep and runs broad and is very, very amazing, as to you never know where the connectivity will lead you to your next opportunity, in life and in career. And I want to welcome everyone today, and I'm going to introduce our featured panelists and just do a brief mention of their names, and then we'll just do an overview, and then each one will introduce themselves because they have extensive bios and a wealth of experience to lend as to when is the time to write a book and how to get the book out of your head and on paper. The when, how, and why. And our panelists will be answering those questions today. So it is with great honor that I have our first, and we have Barry Cohen, who will be joining us as one of our panelists today. Amy Radden. Amy, raise your hand. It's good to see you today. And Andrew Frazier. So Barry is going to kick us off with his introduction of himself, and then we're going to move on down to Amy and then Andrew. Barry?
Thank you, Marcella. So I started my career back in the Pleistocene era. Not that old, but I started my career in broadcast advertising, and I transitioned over to the ad agency and PR firm side. And over the years had succeeded in writing and getting published a couple of my own books, business books. And then as I started to promote them, right, because that's what I do for a living, people just started coming to me right and left and saying, hey, can you help me with my book project? Little did I know that it would end up becoming the mainstay of my business. Today, I spend about 85% of my time working with entrepreneurs and professionals to help them become thought leaders through publishing. So we help them create and promote their books, their ebooks, their audiobooks, their podcasts, their articles, and then get publicity around them to raise their profile and credibility. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. At this point, we've now done about 24 books, and I've got about 10 more in the works at various stages.
Thank you. And Amy?
Hi, Amy Radden. I transitioned about 6 or 7 years ago from an executive career at big financial services brands, American Express, AXA, Citigroup, E-Trade, where I held C-suite roles in marketing, digital, and innovation. When I set out to start a second career after leaving the corporate world, I remember that a friend of mine had planted a bee in my bonnet about writing a book. Well, I know we're going to talk more about how that came about, so I won't go into detail now, but spent about 18 months part-time writing my book, The Changemakers Playbook, which has gotten a lot of great recognition around the world. And my day job is I built a portfolio of mostly early stage startups who I advise on their growth strategies, do consulting work for big brands on customer experience, and serve on a board of directors. Since it's Women's History Month, I'll also mention that, along the way, have raised 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, with my husband, and we live in New Jersey.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm last. Andrew Frazier. Great to see everybody here. Thanks for joining in. I am, I guess, a reluctant author. For the past 12 years, I've been working, coaching, training, consulting entrepreneurs and small business owners, and work with over 1,000 people one-on-one. So I've learned so many key things and really wanted to share them. So that's what my book really ended up being about. it took me 5 years to write my book, but that's because it took me 4.5 years to get help, and finally got my book released, and really excited about it, and really have gotten really great feedback on it as well.
Great, Andrew. And I would have never met Andrew had it not been for Mary. So this is very interesting. And Helen Lawler is going to start our questions. Helen.
Welcome, everybody. I know we're going to get a lot out of this. So the first magic question is, why did you decide to write a book? What motivated you to do it? Who wants to kick it off? Amy, you want to kick it off?
Sure. So as I said, when I was transitioning out of my corporate life, honestly, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And this friend of mine who's a former journalist, a ghostwriter, very accomplished writer, he said, Amy, why don't you write a book? And I was like, great, I need something to do. What finally convinced me that it was a good idea was a piece of advice I got from a friend of mine who's authored many business books. She's like, Amy, write a book if you think you have something to say. There are no economics for the author, so you have to really make sure you feel you have something to say. And we'll talk more about that too, I'm sure. So I really felt that because I had been a top innovation executive at Citi. I was one of the world's first chief innovation officers. And when I went and looked at the market for books on innovation, all the top books of any quality were written by academics and consultants. And I felt I could bring something really unique because I had been an operating executive, actually having to deliver results on something that a lot of people think is, kind of woo-hoo, throw stuff against the wall and see what happens. And so I found my space. And I thought I could really bring value to a large community. That was really what drove my decision.
If I may echo what Amy said, the old adage is write what you know about what you know best. When I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and my mother said, collect your rejection slips. And I did. Everything I sent out got rejected. And as time went on, once I became something of an expert in my field, then the next thing you know, I had people coming to me asking me to write articles or whatever. And I said, wait a minute. There's something here, here's my opportunity. As it happens, a friend of mine who had a larger ad agency had done a book before I did. And I asked him, I said, what did it do for you? He said, well, first of all, it got us noticed when they were calling people in for these ad agency reviews where we might've been passed over, we were too small, but because of the book, we got attention. Secondly, he said, after all the dog and pony shows, people coming in doing their presentations, their heads were spinning, and it was like, well, was he the guy with the blue folder, the red folder, the white folder? No, he was the guy with the book. It set him apart and it distinguished him. And I knew then that this was something I had to do. So my first book was based on my area of interest and expertise, and it was 10 Ways to Screw Up an Ad Campaign. And I mean, I've gotten a lot of mileage out of that book. And in fact, the trick here is to start to create a series, especially if you're in the business book realm. And that's what I was, setting out to do, was to create a whole 10 Ways series, like the Dummies books, like the Idiot's Guides. So the second book was supposed to be 10 Ways to Bulletproof a New Business Startup, but the publisher I had at the time derailed that and changed the title. But there is a third one in the works that will be out before too long, and it's being co-authored with an attorney, and it's 10 Ways to Get Sued by Everyone and Anyone, the Small Business Owner's Guide to Staying Out of Court.
So, and mine really came out of working with business owners, and over time you see patterns of similar challenges that so many of them face. So it was my way of being able to really communicate some of the challenges and solutions that have helped business owners achieve. So the first half of my book is called What You Don't Know Will Hurt You, especially in business. So it's, overview of key things you need to know about marketing, finance, sales, operations, people management. And then the second half is, a process for being able to move forward better. So I think it grew out of just my passion for helping entrepreneurs and business owners be more professional. It's called Running Your Small Business Like a Pro. And, it's about helping them to be able to run their business more professionally.
That's excellent, excellent advice from all three of you. And that brings us to our next question. Could you take us on the journey and what the process looks like to share with the audience? Andrew, you want to continue?
Okay. Like I mentioned, it took me 5 years. So my first book, I didn't really have a good process. I've written 2 more since, so I've gotten better. Barry helped me to figure it out. And I think, especially for your first book, it's the hardest. And it's because you know so many things, and you want to tell everybody everything, but they don't want to hear everything all at once. And you have to really focus on, what is the message that you want to say. But I'd say the biggest and most valuable thing for me, and that helped me move forward, was when I laid out my table of contents, because it helped me really work my way through from this is where we're starting from, this is where we're going, how we're getting there, and this is where we want to end. And then from that, I was really able to, contain my focus and make sure everything was consistent and aligned through the process.
Very interesting. So you would say begin with the end in mind.
There you go.
Yeah, I like that very much. Thank you. Thank you. And Amy, same question.
Sure. So not to make Andrew feel bad about taking 5 years, when I say it took me about 18 months, I'm not acknowledging the 6 or 9 months that it kind of screwed around before I really got down to business. And what really made the difference for me from the start, because I said, well, I'm going to write a book. And so I sat down, I said, I'm going to do this. And I realized that I didn't know what I was doing. And that just because, I said, okay, I know a lot about this topic. I think I'm pretty smart. I've always gotten great feedback on my writing and communication skills, so I should be able to do this. And it was sort of realizing that I wasn't making progress that I said, okay, there's really a method to this, and it takes skill to actually write a book. So the thing that really helped me was I decided to invest in getting a writing coach to help me. I call her a writing coach. I also call her my accountability manager. I worked with a woman who was a former journalist from Business Week, and she basically is in the business now of helping authors get the books out of their heads. And she was very valuable because, like Andrew, the first thing she said was, let's make sure we have a book and not just an article. And the way to validate that you actually have a book is to create a table of contents and sort of a thesis of what your book is going to be about. And I think alongside that, at least at a high level, get an understanding of the market. So is there a competitive space for a book? Is there a problem that you're solving or an issue that you're addressing for a big enough audience that you can get distribution? Because I'm sure we'll talk about this later, no matter what publishing model you decide to publish through, the marketing of the book is largely the author's responsibility. And so you have to start out by understanding, okay, who will want to buy my book? And is there a big enough audience that I'll be able to connect with who can do that? So, because you do want to sell the book. So, but the table of contents, getting access to the skills and disciplines so that I could create a real workflow, and getting an early understanding, at least at a high level, of who's the audience, where are they, how many of them are there, and where do I fit in competitively? We're all really important questions to answer upfront.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. Thank you very much. Barry?
Sure. Yeah, let me add to that and first echo what both of you said, that, I always say, an outline, right? you can call it the table of contents, you can call it an outline, but structure is important. You have to have a structure going forward. But what I always tell all my author clients, first and foremost, is define the audience, define and refine who you are writing for. Amy alluded to that briefly. I can't stress enough that everything about the book is going to grow out of, in terms of process, it's going to grow out of that definition of the audience. The way you title it, the way you design it, the way you write it, the way you structure it, and the language you use, everything. So start with the audience first and foremost. And as far as process, there's not one right way to do this. And we've all felt our way through this process. And what we found now is that, I'll send people out a questionnaire, right? And it's partly to see if they're really serious about doing it, right? But it's also partly to help them to start. I call it an author thought starter questionnaire. It's to help them get those thoughts organized. And from that, they can generate that outline or that table of contents. But beyond that, there's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak, pardon the expression. But for example, today we're using technology for process. We have clients that are too busy to write a book. We have clients that are challenged. Maybe they have, dyslexia or whatever, right? And as a result, we found that we can do it with technology. How do we do that? So the process we're using now with people that are having difficulty is we do a Zoom call, we record the call, we interview them, we Q&A them. We take the interview, the audio track of it, we run it through speech to text, software, transcribe it, and then edit from the transcript. So there's more than one way to get a book done in terms of process.
I think a couple of points on process, though, that just to add to that are really important. And this is something I spoke to a lot of authors before I decided to write the book, and a consistent piece of advice that I learned from experience trying to avoid is you have to schedule regular time if you really want to get the book done. And
Yes.
Decent blocks of time. A book is not something that you're going to be successful writing an hour here, an hour there, squeezing it in between things. It's really, I would block out, 3 or 4 hour chunks of time. And sometimes I produced nothing. Sometimes I wrote half a chapter. Sometimes I edited. Sometimes I wrote and threw it out at the end. But to schedule that time and stick to it, turn off the emails, turn off the phone, and really immerse yourself in the book is, I think, an unavoidable process step, no matter what, whether you're recording or typing into a keyboard or scribbling in a notebook, you've got to schedule meaningful blocks of time.
Yeah.
every
Let
week.
me jump in for a second because I'm so glad you said that. I actually did my first 2 books in a period of 6 months while running a business 50 hours a week. And the only reason I was able to do that is because of exactly what Amy just said. I scheduled a block of time of 4 to 5 hours every Sunday for 26 weeks straight. If the bombs were going off, I was writing. And I was able to produce a 70,000 word book in a period of 6 months by doing that. Now, not everybody can work quite that intensely, but I got to tell you, you have to find your rhythm, right? And it's so important. I co-authored one book with a gentleman from Houston, and we did this. Our writing styles meshed perfectly, but our working styles were completely different. He was the one that would, burn the midnight oil before a deadline and just crank it out, whereas I was just, the tortoise steadily plodding along. But to Amy's point, so important, scheduling those blocks of time. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
And also it becomes a personal journey. Everybody's journey is different. It took me longer than Amy because I started further behind. I don't know. I actually studied mechanical engineering undergrad, and I went there because I didn't have to take a writing course. So, I'm starting a little behind, and I never learned how to type because my typing class in high school was last period. So I dropped it so I could go home early, and wish I could get that back as well. But, over time I've learned, and, really one of the biggest values that you don't even think about when you're writing it that I found was, um, when you learn something, you learn it a little. When you do something, you learn it a lot more. When you teach something, you learn it a lot more because you have to be able to answer questions about it. But then when you write a book, it's the whole next level because you have to answer people's questions that they didn't even ask you yet. So you really learn what you do that much better. So it's made me a lot better at what I do and actually helped me to create systems and processes around it so other people can do it as well.
I really agree. It builds I found writing, when I write, it builds my kind of critical thinking muscle around whatever it is I'm working on. The other thing, you said something, Andrew, that struck a note with me is that everybody's process is personal. One of the things that I realized was, even though I'm an introvert, so you would think this would be perfect for me because it's like it can be very lonely to write. And I quickly realized that even though I'm recognized as having a lot of expertise in my topic, I know what I don't know. And I'm in a field that every day is changing. And I found it very lonely to just sit and punch things out at the keyboard. And so I said, the process that I created, and it really enriched the content of my book, was for each chapter to interview a group of experts who were very different from me. And so, first of all, and I included my audience, I defined as either corporate innovators or founders, could really be either. So very diverse audience. So I was very deliberate in reaching out to people who were either corporate innovators or people in the startup world, and also the investor community, and interviewed a group of people for each chapter. So that was a very important part of my process, and also drove the content to a much higher level of quality, and provided a little bit of a marketing advantage because I now have this community of 50 people and franchised my book.
If I may also add to that, and that's perfect because that's exactly what we advise all of our authors to do. We were doing a book with a young gentleman on how millennial entrepreneurs create businesses differently than our generation did. And one of the things we did was to bring in experts, for example, a psychologist, to talk about entrepreneurial burnout, because a lot of young people are going to, because of their energy level, just crash and burn. So yes, we do that. We advise that all the time, and it does enrich the book and definitely raises the standard and the quality of the book.
So,
Great advice.
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about the economics involved and how do you plan for that? Are there certain considerations you have from the financial side when you're writing the book?
I guess first thing is don't quit your day job because you're not going to make that much money very soon. Definitely you can make money from a book, but I found there's a lot more value in a lot more other ways that you can make it more worth your while and benefit more. So so definitely having a plan, like Amy said, what's the market, who are you trying to reach, how are you trying to reach them? But I can say it's definitely helped me get more business opportunities to work with people because they have seen my book, as well as people who have read my book really like it. So I think that, and then also speaking, I'm working on going to speaking around my business, but never really spoke that much either. So this is helping make it easier because, understanding the content better to be able to speak about it.
In terms of economics, the barriers to entry have been lowered, right? The reality is that most people should understand that they're probably not going to get a contract with a major legacy publisher. The big publishing companies are caving in. They're merging, they're downsizing, they're going out of business because it's basically a broken model. They don't make money on 99 out of 100 books. They're waiting for the next Harry Potter to walk through the door. So the doors have been slammed in terms of that venue. The reality is that you either go to a small independent publisher or you self-publish. And whereas self-publishing used to be costly and it used to be cumbersome and it used to be looked down upon, that's not the case anymore. Today, in terms of economics, you can go out of pocket for, no more than maybe $700 and get a good quality book out there. All right. But again, as Amy alluded to earlier, there's 8 million titles on Amazon. The book's not going to fly off the shelf. You've got to be prepared to invest in promoting it because no matter what publisher you use, they're not going to do it for you. I know a woman who wrote a cookbook that was published by Random House, the biggest publisher on the planet. She had to go up and down Fifth Avenue in New York and knock on doors, set up her own book signings. So, you definitely have to budget some money. Now, again, as Andrew and Amy both said, if you're using outside help, for example, a lot of people will engage people like me, to edit their book, to ghostwrite their book, to promote their book. It's not in the stratosphere, but you do have to have some money set aside for that. Now, if you feel that you can absolutely do everything yourself, again, the economics have come down to the point where, for a few $100s, you can do everything yourself. You can use Amazon's CreateSpace, you can use Ingram Spark, any number of platforms where you can do everything yourself. However, it's probably best to get help in the areas that you're not strongest in and shop around, so to speak. Talk to a few people, get references by all means. See who else has worked with them, get some good testimonials on people before you go and hire them. But, you can do this without spending a fortune.
Yeah, I think I have a lot to say on this topic, so let me try to focus on a few things. First of all, I would recommend speaking to, just like you're doing today, learning from other people who have published books and understand particularly why they did it and how they saw the business model for their book. So, because the why, like I wrote my book, I had something to say, I really wanted to share my expertise. I also wanted a very high quality book. And so that led me to say, I'm going to make investments to make sure this is a really high quality book and comes off in the marketplace in a really strong way. And so I built a P&L and I started to look at, okay, what am I willing to invest? And then how am I going to monetize the book? I've taken a very long-term time horizon on the book. Although the average, people will say a book maybe has you'll get the most out of a book in the first 2 years after it's published. I've managed to really create a pretty long tail for my books. The content is completely evergreen. What are the things I invested in? Well, I invested in a coach to help put structure and discipline and skill around and advice around the way I was writing the book. I invested in ongoing social media support to help me not write my social media, but to help me with, again, discipline, structure, editorial support around writing the book. At launch, I invested in, for a couple of months, a publicist to help me with the process of getting the book in front of people in the media who would review it and potentially call me as a source if they were writing on my content area. I invested in digital support to help me create and maintain amyradin.com, which is my website that houses the book and also other information about me. So there are a number of line items where I made investments. Where do how does the book help me in my commercial aspirations? Pre-pandemic, I was doing really well as a keynote speaker. Most business books will sell through bulk sales. So, and in my business relationship, I control the pricing of bulk sales. So very often I will do a keynote and bundle in hundreds of copies of the book. It's a great way to move it. And then I think in general, the book has served as a platform to help people see me as a highly qualified expert when they want to bring on board a consultant, an advisor. I've done workshops. So it's very hard to attribute directly where the book has built my business, but it's absolutely been a credibility builder and core to my platform for all of the other commercial activities that I've undertaken at this point in my career.
In terms of generating income as opposed to the economics of the outlay of the book, I was given some very good advice by somebody once who had written a lot more books than I had. And he said, you're not going to make your money on a $12.95 paperback, right? The reality is you build out a whole product line, right, around your content. People are consuming their content through multiple channels today. So of course, the more channels you can use, the more ways you can reach people. So if you have the book, the ebook, the audiobook, the podcast, the articles, the webinars, the teleseminars, the live speaking engagements, et cetera, and the courses, right, ad infinitum, and Andrew can speak to that because he's doing it, then it's Barry in a box for $200 and you sell a couple of those while you sleep, and then you're going to make some money as opposed to, just selling the book. And to Amy's point, bulk sales, definitely make a difference. I took this up with two organizations. When I wrote the advertising book, I had the Radio Advertising Bureau and the National Association of Broadcasters agree that in exchange for a cut of proceeds, they would sell the books on their website through their online store and at their live conferences, whether I was speaking there or not. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, but nonetheless, you will sell the most books when you're in the room with people and you inspire them. And I'm sure, Amy, you can relate to that.
Absolutely. I think that, by the way, something that I think that's really true. One more, I want to go back to the business model, because one really important decision is how you want to publish. And Barry talked before about, there are big publishers, there's independents, there's self-publishing. I did not want to self-publish my book. I wanted the legitimacy of a publisher affiliation. It was really, really important to me, and given my whole strategy of, I want to produce a really high quality book. I needed that. On the other hand, I was nervous about quality, though I know the quality of self-publishing has gotten a lot better, but I was not going to go down the Amazon self-publishing route. That was not for me. On the other hand, the big publishers, and I actually had a contract from a traditional publisher that I turned down because I did not like the rights clause. I did not want to give up the rights to my content, which was a requirement of the contract. I wanted more control. So I chose the middle ground of an independent publisher called City Point Press that has an affiliation with Simon & Schuster. I liked the quality of what they were publishing. The deal, you end up with different economics. I fronted the cost to print the book and had to pay a fee to the publisher. I do much better on the back end than I ever would with a traditional publisher. And I had a quality book and a lot of support in terms of copy editing, cover design. I controlled, which is a large publisher, you don't control the cover design. I control my publishing date, which with a large publisher, you don't control your publishing date. So I had the control that I wanted, good economics if I was willing to look at it, and long-term, and I liked the support that I was getting. So that, for me, turned out to be the right answer.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I have a question from the audience real quick to interject while you're on this point. We have a question in chat. To build off Amy's point, can you all, everyone, collectively, or the panelists, provide some examples of structured agreements with the publisher, like just some, doesn't have to be something you've experienced, but like an example of what that would look like, or if there is such a thing?
Thank you, Marcella.
Okay, so as far as agreements with publishers, to Amy's point, most of the time they do want you to give up practically all your rights. I've been on both sides. I've done self-published and I've been traditionally published by both a smaller and a larger publisher. And what I found was that in time, I was able to actually take rights back. You'll hit a point. If you're not with a huge publisher, they don't keep what we call a big backlist, meaning older titles. So once the book hits a certain point in time, as Amy alluded to earlier, there's kind of a drop off, and they very, very well may backlist your book, meaning it kind of gets backburnered, or they may say we're done with it, it's going to go out of print. So the important thing to do is make sure that you write reversion rights into your contract, which I did, even though it wasn't in my first contract. That means that anytime the book goes out of print, all rights revert back to you. But the reality is that I found the publisher. There's a long story, and I'll make it really short. The publisher that I had actually was sold, right? And once it was acquired, once the book was acquired, I ended up with a better deal. But I still had to kind of fight to take rights back. Because, for example, if they're not doing audiobooks, why should you give away the right to an audiobook? If I can produce an audiobook myself, then why shouldn't I be able to have that right? And they're not going to share in the profit if they don't produce it or market it in any way. But unfortunately, most publishing agreements are structured entirely in favor of the publisher. And I say most. For example, one more point, right? When it comes to what they call serial rights. Suppose your book is a novel and you want to go to TV and film with it, right? Most of them are going to be looking for a big chunk of that to come back to them, 50% in some cases. So you really, really have to be careful about.
Right, and I had a different experience working with an independent publisher, for example, and this is one of the other things that City Point did for me that I didn't mention. They rep my book to like for international. So my book is published in Russian, not the language you want to be out in these days, but my book is published in Russian. I earned a royalty for that. My book content was purchased by Audible. I got a really nice check for the Audible purchase. And so, those were nice benefits that I didn't count on in my business model at all.
And I'm sort of
different. We're very different from what you would get with a traditional publisher, but it's all trade-offs about what you want and what you want to go after.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's a million different options. I looked at some offers from smaller publishers, and those were still kind of one-sided, and definitely the economics are less than half of what they are as a self-publisher. Question is, are they going to sell more for you, or are you going to sell more? And actually what I set up was a medium. Like I created an online university for business owners. So underneath the university, I created a press and a publishing through there. So I can publish my books and other people's books on a platform rather than just being a plain old independent author, which is in the middle and keep access to everything. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do it, but you just got to be what makes the most sense for you, and where you are, and what type of time and energy you want to invest in it.
Yeah, so we took a different route recently in the last couple of years, and that is that we actually hooked up with a small independent publisher and agreed with them to launch our own imprint. An imprint is a label, is a brand within the publishing house. So that publisher was actually out of Key West, Florida. He recently sold the business to a New York City publisher who I continue to work with. So we now have Mentor Business Books, which is our own label. So we've become the publisher.
So,
That's really exciting. I know. So there's a couple questions. I know, Marlene, you have a question. Also, Megan had asked about working with someone, cost seemed high at $50,000, and she wanted to delve in a little bit more to the economics of the coach, and using someone for that purpose. I know, Amy, you gave a bit of a response, but I don't know if anyone else wants to jump into there, and then Marlene will take your question next.
Well, I work with Barry, but I've looked at a lot of different coaches and people in the business. And, it can range from very low to super high. One thing, a lot of people sort of were offered more of a talk to you about your book than really helping you with your book, and we're still really expensive. So I was kind of shied away from that because I could talk to myself about my book or whatever. I need help getting my book done, and a good book. So, I think definitely you can choose who you want to go with, but you want to think about what you really need, as opposed to what they're offering, because a lot of times you can pay a whole bunch of money and not get what you need. One thing that affected a lot of prices is some places would also sell you bestseller status. So, they make you a bestseller as part of the deal so they can charge you more. And they have to invest money to do that, but it's a little bit disingenuous if you're a bestseller when you really aren't. But I guess a lot of people get it that way. So, definitely, that's a lot of money for something. I would shop around, at least talk to 3, 5, maybe even 10 different options.
Yeah,
Look,
I really,
I was
Andrew.
gonna say,
did it.
I would be open to anybody having an offline conversation about fees. I don't want to disclose them online, but it really does depend somewhat. Actual mileage may vary, depends somewhat on the project. I have to look at what somebody has to decide what I'm going to charge. People come to me with just an idea. People come to me with an outline. People come to me with a rough draft. People come to me with a finished book that needs promotion. So, it's highly variable, but let's put it this way. I'm not getting rich doing this. I do it because I love it. So anybody that wants to have an offline conversation about fees, I'll be happy to entertain it.
Yeah, I just want to build on Andrew's comment. I think, Andrew, your point is excellent. You have to know what you want, right? So in my case, I started to think I was going to write a book. I realized I was getting no place. I said, I really need skill. I need someone who's going to roll up their sleeves and work with me, but I did not want them to write the book. The book had to very much be in my voice. So I wanted to write the book. I wanted it to be my thought leadership, but I needed that. That's why I call Ellen, the woman who I worked with, my accountability manager, because we established a process of every second Friday, we met 9 o'clock in the morning for an hour. And then I would agree on what I was going to deliver to her by 3 or 4 days before our next meeting. And I would tell her what I was stuck on and what I needed help on. So it was a very specific process. Also, you have to feel you're compatible with the person. Do you like their work style? Are they excited about your content? I wouldn't hire somebody who wasn't genuinely excited and interested in my content. And so I wanted her for those specialist skills. And then, I went through the list before, the other people who I worked with. My choice was I was going to hire specialists for the different things that I needed and manage them, not try to buy some one side, some total ball of wax. I felt buying specialist skills when I specifically needed them was going to be a lot more helpful. And I'm really happy. For me, my decisions all worked out really well.
Good points, Amy. I mean, I found that one of the things that you mentioned is so important, and that is chemistry. Somebody asked me once on a call recently, they said, well, I know 3 people that do what you do. So how do I decide? I said, decide by who you feel comfortable with. If they're all skilled, but I would say, this as well. Try to feel out the person's level of commitment to you. Okay. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a 94-year-old gentleman who was the foremost publicist in the music business. He worked with all the stars, everybody from Willie Nelson to Linda Ronstadt to James Taylor to Alice Cooper to Jerry Garcia. He was writing his memoirs and I was editing them. And midway through, this is a 94-year-old guy that read the New York Times every day. Glaucoma robbed him of his vision. I went to his house and I sat across the kitchen table and I read my edits aloud to him for his approval. That's my commitment.
Great,
Thank
excellent.
you, Barry. Thank you so much. And Marlene, your hand is up. Marlene has a question. And
Yeah,
thank you
I have a
today.
question when you were talking about ownership of the book. So the content of the book is copywritten to you, right, to the writer. And so the writer always owns the content of the book. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so what the publisher then owns, if they're going to own it, is the physical book in its finished form, but you own the contents, and if you wanted to take them somewhere else, you could do that.
Well, they'll own the design. If they did the cover design, they'll own the formatting and the interior if they did that for you. But as far as taking it somewhere else, it depends on what your contract says. You know, for example, you know, some of them are 5-year contracts, some are open-ended, some are 10-year.
But I mean, if you wanted to do something else with the copy, if you wanted to use it to write a blog or to write something else, that copy you own.
Okay, again, depending on your contract, because if it's something like just a blog or an article, probably it won't be an issue. But if it's going to be something more, you know, long form, then it could be an issue.
Okay.
Right, like an example would be one of the things that I've done. I just, I partnered with a big association to develop Coursera content off my book. So I now have a program out on Coursera, Innovation Demystified, Practical Tools for Finance Professionals. And it's totally off the content of my book. It references the book. You know, I'm really happy. I didn't have to ask anybody permission to do that. I guess I got to a point in my life where I wanted like no bureaucracy and I didn't want to have to ask permission for anything. I did that for 25 years in the corporate world. I had enough of it. So I could just do that. Whereas if I were in a traditional publisher relationship, that kind of thing would have been an issue because I have this vision of developing follow-on modules. I'm going to have a whole series on Coursera, which by the way, is another revenue stream. So I didn't want to have to ask.
And it looks like Lorraine's got a question as well.
Yeah, I know. I self-published a book back in 2011 and I had to buy my own ISBN number. But when I had worked with somebody that they were going to design the cover and everything, they kind of did a switcheroo on me and I had to fire them because they put their own ISBN number on it. And that meant that they owned the book. So when you go with a publisher who owns the who owns the ISBN, I guess that's part of the contract. That's part of your
That's a
contract?
question, right?
Yeah.
Barry?
Can't give you a definitive answer.
Okay.
Okay. But at least, you know, I do my own ISDN and have a bundle underneath my university publishing. But it does at a minimum signify who you're tied to. So, you know, whenever the book's looked up, they see who the ISDN came from. So, so yeah, I would be careful about it. And they're really cheap to buy online. So
Yeah.
someone's going to charge you way more for that and for your barcode, and you can just buy them online in like 5 seconds.
Right. But I will say this, that even though technically under the current copyright law, and I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on television, under the current copyright law, if you publish with the proper notice, the C in the circle, your name and the year, technically the book is, you know, protected. I still recommend, if you're self-publishing, that you register it with the Copyright Office. It's only about $35. And that way, if there was ever an infringement, you have documentation that you authored the book and when you did.
I'm lucky. My husband happens to be an IP attorney. So I got lots of advice on this. Yeah, But
Okay. And
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Please feel free to take yourself off mute and ask your question.
I just have a quick one before I have to hop. This has been enjoyable to watch the interplay. I got to admit, I think it was one of the comments that reminded me of an episode I saw about Dick Van Dyke writing a book. When he was locking himself away in a hunting cabin and all this kind of stuff. It was a riot. If you've never seen it, you could probably find it on some kind of search or BTV or something. But that being said, what was the biggest surprise? I mean, what was one of those things that says, oh yeah, I'll be able to do this in no time. And 4.5 years later, I'm just exaggerating, obviously, but were there any things that go, wow, that came out of the blue? I didn't expect that.
Yeah, I can give you one. Doug, on my second book, we had gone through the entire process and we were ready to release. And all of a sudden we get an email, not a call or anything else, but an email saying that the presses were stopped. Why? Okay, we call and we find out that, well, the book buyers at Barnes & Noble didn't think that during a recession people would want another book on startups. Wrong. GE and Microsoft were started during recessions. They also felt that, well, there's so many books of this type out there. So I had to literally go to Barnes & Noble, pull every startup book off the shelf and do a spreadsheet and show them what we covered and they didn't, what we did in more depth than they did. And ultimately they relented and we did get the book out, but that was a complete surprise.
And I would say, even though my book took 5 years, it probably needed to be, or that made it so much better because I'm working with people and I work with so many more people with the book in mind and really use that as a way to test out what I'm writing about even more. So I think it just really helped to develop me and my ability and my business in many different ways. So I don't think, so I think just the benefits far beyond writing it and monetary. And the other thing that surprised me, which I guess isn't super surprising in this environment, is I invested in an audiobook, and I've sold more audiobooks than everything else combined. So and it only cost me $500 to get someone else to read it. So yeah.
Let me coattail on what Andrew said too, because in terms of surprise, the good surprises, right? You have no idea how far you can go with this book, right? You put a book out there and I'm monitoring it all the time. You do a Google search or whatever, and you see where you pop up, right? So I see this one, reference, and it says City University. I'm thinking, oh, the City University Library in New York has my book. Well, no, I click the link. It's the City University of Hong Kong's Run Run Shu Library has a copy of my book. You have no idea how far you'll go with this. Then I get an email one day from somebody in Medellin, Colombia, and I'm thinking, what is this, the drug cartel? What do they want with me? Well, it turns out a gentleman by the name of Carlos Fernando Villagomez had a whole enterprise in Colombia. He had a magazine, he had a blog, he had a website, he had a radio show, a TV show, all about marketing. He comes to the States each year and he interviews a bunch of authors and experts, puts it all together and then drips it out. And then I find out it gets later rebroadcast all over Latin America. He interviewed me twice, then invited me to come down to a conference and speak, which I wasn't able to go to, but I sent a colleague. But you have no idea how far you will go. Once, and Andrew can corroborate this, once you give the book a push and it has legs, then the opportunities start to come to you and they snowball.
And it's high quality and you take responsibility to be the chief marketing officer for your book. So in answer to the question, I'll make a couple of points. Number one, all the advice, everything that authors told me before turned out to be true. That I had to block serious time or I was never going to get the book done. That I had to be that I was going to be in charge of marketing the book. that I was not, that the economics of a book as a standalone product are irrational from the point of view of the author. So everything people told me turned out to be true, probably amplified. Really agree with the point about my book. Last week, I got an email from a friend of mine who was in South Africa with a snapshot of my book on sale in a bookstore in South Africa. It was like such a thrill, to get the copy of my book in Asia. To know that my book was on sale in Asia as well. It's like really, really exciting to get. I spoke to the board of directors in their strategy offsite for one of the biggest banks in Nigeria. They flew me over to London to speak with them because of my book. So it has opened a lot of doors. It vastly expanded my network. Two of the people on the call today, Minerva, Yash, who's dialing in from Asia, I never would have met had it not been for my book. So vastly expanded relationships and my network. But because I also became very active on LinkedIn, coincident with, because of the publication of my book. So all positive. And I've gotten some, and the book has won numerous awards and recognitions. So it was really nice to have, surprise, really nice to get the recognition for all the effort that I put in.
Well, I want to say thanks to everybody who put this together. I really do. I've got to hop to a 1 o'clock, but I got to admit, the one thing Amy talked about that I can only encourage you is I've read enough self-published stuff that it's like, really, it's like, this is the best you can do, in terms of how many other ideas basically have you borrowed from other people over the course of your career and just repackaged them and called them your book. Boy, that I gotta admit, that's one of those things that just drives me personally crazy. It's like, there's not an original thought in the book other than the fact that you basically were a compiler as opposed to an author, if you understand the distinction that I'm making. That is my pet peeve. But again, thank you. I hate to cut and run, but
Can I say thank you, Doug, real quick before you cut and run? You are
Sure.
an inspiration to me, and I always appreciate your support.
You
Thank
got
you
it.
for joining us today.
Goodbye, all.
Okay. All right. Do you want to get a picture, Marcella,
Yes.
before everybody heads out? Yeah.
And
Oh,
I'll
sure.
definitely tag Doug.
Sure. Now you're making me hang
Okay.
out for another 30 seconds.
Here we go.
Do I
Smile,
get to
everyone.
put bestseller across my chest if I could buy, if I pay enough for 50 over 50?
We're good. I did good.
Okay.
Everyone,
Bye.
tag me on LinkedIn. We'll
All right.
keep the conversation going. Thank you, Doug. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Good.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? If not, we're going to leave it to our panelists to leave us with some closing remarks, and much appreciate everyone today. Susanna, Marlene, Joe, Dr. Maida, and Beth. I see that you're here as well as a call-in, and very, very much appreciate everyone today. Any other questions? If not, we're going to go back to our panelists for closing remarks.
I mean, I had a question, but it's going to be
Yeah.
too long to answer. So I just want to put it out there. Each one of you, obviously accomplished authors, and my thought process is like, where in the beginning, really just go all the way back to the beginning around your inspiration. How many times have you talked to people about your story and they're like, oh, you should write a book? I've heard that 20 times, 25, I don't know, more than that. But, then I think, well, maybe I don't really think that my story is that worthy of a book. But, when it comes to inspiration and content, could you just just to give a brief, recommendation on what do you think, what works? I know like Amy, you were writing about stuff that's more white space oriented and innovation. And I know that, people are certainly interested in hearing that because it's more educational than anything else. But when it comes to kind of more of the softer types of topics like life experiences and and where you went. Listen, I was taught, the guy we had last week, I told him I'm 65 and I got a black belt over 60, and I'm a master's bodybuilding champion over 60, and all sorts of things I've done over 60. And so right away, you should write a book. But that said, go back to your inspiration and just kind of give us just a little bit of a thought on that.
I mean,
I mean, go ahead, Andrew.
no, I was gonna say, it's more about my passion, and what I like to do, but it should fit your mission. What is your purpose? And the other side is you want it to be something somebody wants to read. So, the radio station WIFM, what's in it for the reader? Like, you've done these things, that's great, but what can I as the reader take from that and have it benefit me and my life?
I mean, I work a lot with startups now, and so many startups who started because the founding team had a problem and they realized there were a lot of people with the same problem and they wanted to solve the problem. And I guess it was kind of similar for me in my book. I was in the trenches inside a big bank with all of the bureaucracy and regulation and silos and all stuff, tasked with making cities' retail business innovative. And so I sort of saw the struggle. And I was like, wow, I've learned a lot from this experience. There are a lot of people out there who are trying to get, market insights and ideas to stand up as concepts and become businesses. And I know a lot about this now, and I want to really help people do this with, learning the benefits from my experiences, and those are the people that I interviewed. And so it was that passion for helping a large audience solve a problem that I had experienced, and that I saw in many other people, that sort of gave me the energy to want to write the book.
To answer Joe's question directly, what I've seen is that there's a huge market for people who are writing inspirational books. And I don't mean that just in a faith or religious sense. I've worked with several authors that had a really powerful personal story to tell of overcoming great adversity. And people do want to read those stories. They are inspired by them, and they find lessons in them that they can use. I'll give you a really, really short synopsis of one of them. A gentleman grew up in Patterson, the worst building imaginable. You couldn't walk down the stairs without stepping on crack vials. All his brothers ended up on drugs, in jail, or dead. He won a scholarship to Rutgers to play football, and his coach introduced him to a gentleman in a Rutgers alumnus in the weight room, who took him under his wing and mentored him, right? And he laid out his whole career path for him. He said, when you finish Rutgers, you're going to law school. After that, you're going to become you're going to go to private practice. After that, you're going to go become a federal prosecutor. Everything he said and more happened. Today, the man is in-house counsel at Public Service, Electric and Gas. I mean, that's just one. People want to read those stories. They want to hear those stories.
Thank you.
And by the way, I'm also a PhD candidate at Rutgers. So, I don't know. I'm not letting any grass grow under my feet, but
good for you.
People say 60 is the new whatever. 60, it's just the new 60. It's not 60 is the new anything. It's the new 60 and what's possible. And if people really put their minds and bodies to the effort, you'll certainly achieve it. It's most of it's just mental.
Ask me on December 31st when I turn 70.
Yeah, there you go.
Anything else in closing from our panel?
I think we're good.
Go for it.
That's a great way to end.
Yeah, it is.
That's a great way to close. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Inspiration today. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you to our panel especially.
Yes.
And we hope you guys can all join us next time. For our next.
Thank you. This was great.
Good luck with your book journeys.
Thank you.
Happy writing.
Okay.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
right,
All right, nice job.
Oh,
Nice meeting
good.
you, Amy. Definitely.
excellent,
thank
great,
you
great.
about your journey.
Yes, thank you very, very much. This all worked. See how it just kind of just flows when the panel gets talking. It just.
No, it went really well. I wish we had a bigger audience, but what are you gonna do with the video? I think we have the benefit of the video.
Mhm.
So